Hi, it's very early in the morning of the 18th, 7th, wait a minute, I'm getting confused. 17th of August. I'm Scott McLean. I'm the content creator for the YouTube channel Pondering in Pattaya. It's dedicated to helping people trying to live their best life possible anywhere in the world. And I'd like to continue a new segment on my life in the music business, which started in 1972 almost by accident and lasted until 2016. I was driving a cab full time, and I had found a new place to dwell, but it wasn't on Lonely Street. And I was selling records in front of Boston University Student Union when John Silver had just taken over as the chancellor of BU. Howard Stern was a student there, and so was a young kid, a punk from Darien, Connecticut by the name of Jeff Connolly, who went on to become Mono Man and leader of DMZ and the Liars. And on an early morning, I think it was in 1976, I sold him his first real copy of a 13th Floor Elevators record, and I think it greatly influenced him further on in life. I was friends with Jeff for almost 50 years. It was not always pleasant. He was a contentious guy, but a genius, a musical genius, and he passed away this past week. And so I want to put out my sincere condolences to Jeff's friends, Patty McGrath, Clint Connolly, Peter Prescott, a lot of people. And Jeff will be missed. But anyway, so I was selling records in front of BU, and then one day, this one-armed man, he almost looked like the fugitive in the movie with David Jansen, came up to me and said, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Do you have a permit to do this? What are you doing?" And I said, "No, I'm just like the other vendors here. I set up several mornings a week, and I try to sell my records to the BU students." Well, he said, "You can't do it anymore, and you've got to get out of here right away, immediately." And he had a suit and he had on a sport coat and a tie, and it was about 9 in the morning. And then I realized who he was. He was John Silver, the former, he had something to do with Texas government. I don't remember what it was. And he had become the current chancellor of BU. He'd been brought in with his get tough reputation. And boy, he was a nuisance. But I pulled all my stuff out and I left. That was the last I ever sold at BU. And at this point, we were having problems selling at Harvard. They'd really clamped down on the vendors on the street. The local merchants had really gotten together and tried to drive us out. So we went to Northeastern. We went to Northeastern on Huntington Ave, and we set up there. And there were a lot of urban people that were there, and they liked what we were selling, but they didn't have a lot of money. And they said to me, "Would you take food stamps?" And I said, "Okay, for every $1 of records, you have to give me $2 of food stamps," which they were amenable to because they got the food stamps for free, and they could buy records with them. And that's what would happen. We would have guys would come up and want to buy jazz records and urban records and occasional rock records, and they'd want $20 worth of records, and they'd give us $40 in food stamps. And then we would go down to a liquor store. No, it was a grocery store that sold beer and wine on Dot Ave, a Chinese grocery store. And they would take food stamps for the booze. So in essence, I was getting double pay and then using the food stamps to buy stuff you're not supposed to. And I would buy like cases of beer with them, and it was great. At this point, we were probably making, in the street, I was doing a couple $100 a day, cash, on something that I had at least 100% profit on. Because we ran ads in the Phoenix, and I think they were like $3 a week. They were next to nothing. And we were making big money. I was netting probably $400 a week in 1976. No taxes, sulatab, and it was great. It was great, but it was still not enough because I was living on Summer Street above Joel Bernstein, my soon-to-be partner in a record store, and my a fellow street vendor. And in 1977, a former cab driving friend of mine, Danny Riccio, he was running a record store that was owned by a rich kid from LA named Mark Zimmerman. And they called it Zounds, and Danny was the manager. And Danny approached me and said, do you want to run the record department? The rock record department. I said, yeah, of course. No problem. And I was getting paid $130 a week to work either 5 or 6 days a week. And I loved it. It was a great job. I worked with Leo Jarvis, who I'll talk about a lot later on. Eddie Gorodetsky, very well-known name. He went on to be Chuck Lorre's #1 boy. He wrote Two and a Half Men. He wrote, Robert Ulrich's Love Boat. A couple of other big shows. I think Sabrina the Teenage Witch, but I'm not positive. The thing with Kevin James and Leah Remini. I don't remember the name of the show. It was a big show. And then, then another friend of mine, Nick Bakai, went on to write both the Paul Blart Mall Cop movies. Anyway, I'm getting off track. And I went to work for Danny, and it was a little store directly across the street from BCN. And every day almost, Kenny Greenblatt, who was the head of sales at BCN, would come in with between 50 and 100 records in a big bag and sell them. There were promos that came to BCN, and Kenny would sell them across the street. I don't think he was declaring a penny of the income. I know he wasn't. And we would sell them, and we had a lot of people that would come in. Bob Porter from Arista Records, who ran the jazz label at Arista. It was Savoy Riches for the most part. Bob would come in about once every month he lived in Jersey, and he would come in with a trunk full of records, maybe 1,000 records, lots of compilations. All Remember When compilations from the 50s. And that's what the basis of the store was. It was a promo dump. The first real promo dump in Boston. But it was run so haphazardly. I worked there for almost a year. I was having a sanctioned affair by a friend of mine from home's wife. It was sanctioned by my buddy. He approached me and said, would you go out with my wife? Wow, it's an offer I couldn't refuse. And was met with disdain by Danny's wife, Peggy, who's a sweetheart, wonderful woman, who just passed away in the last 6 weeks. My condolences to you, Miss Melissa. And Danny Jr. and what the hell was the other sister's name? Anyway, I worked there from, I think it was March of 77 until January of 78. And then I was approached by Joel and Lanny to open another store, our own store. And I said, I don't have any money to put into it. They said, no, don't worry about it. You can put in some records, and you can pay us back a certain amount per week for your share. And that was the genesis of Nuggets, my first record store that opened on my birthday in 1978, January 18th, still in business, still being run now, 48 and a half years later, by Stuart Friedman, who was our first paid employee. And, oh my God, I've gone on forever. Okay, like, share, and subscribe to Pondering in Pattaya, my YouTube channel that is dedicated to helping people live their best life possible. This is segment 3. There will be a segment 4. It'll deal a little more with the beginning of nuggets, but that's all I'm going to say. Sawadee Kop, Sawadee Be My Cop, Chodi Kop, and the best, all my best, all my love to you.